So this is chapter 4, part 2 of audio media, music recordings, and radio. New business models emerging. The music industry needs to develop new ways to sell music that match consumer interests and patterns of media use. Downloading music is hardly a recent activity, not until the advent of Apple's iTunes in 2003. However, did the music industry finally succeed in getting consumers to pay for their downloads? Many artists and labels were concerned about this and the process of allowing consumers to pay per song because it could potentially kill an album faster. And though this concern is largely valid, in 2013 there were $1.6 billion in sales of individual songs online, which is 7 times the volume of online album sales. Added content, such as what's seen here, like behind the scenes footage, exclusive interviews, games, movies, makes in downloading an entire album appealing, but not enough to justify the higher price of the entire collection of songs. Subscription services have grown remarkably in recent years, and they offer great potential for new types of revenue streams. Many subscriptions operate on the freemium model, which means that some content is free, but a monthly subscription is required to take advantage of all the site has to offer. So what is broadcasting? The term broadcasting originally refers to the practice of planting seeds by casting them broadly in a field rather than depositing them one at a time. In the early days, broadcasting as we know it, wireless communication, initially is only radio and only provided point-to-point communication where telegraph lines were impractical or unreliable. However, many years later, TV allowed for the broadcasting of moving pictures as well as audio via wireless technology. Broadcast technology works in the same way in both radio and TV, where a transmitter sends messages over a part of the electromagnetic spectrum to receiver or antenna that translates the messages to the radio or TV. Radio, the most widely available medium of mass communication around the world, is also the most heavily used medium in the U.S. People listen to radio on average over 2.5 hours per day, although different types of research present disparate findings. Radio is less expensive to produce, transmit, and receive than TV. Radio receivers are highly portable, even wearable, and radio doesn't require literacy to understand. We've all heard of AM and FM, but what do they stand for? So AM, which is amplitude modulation, a radio carrier signal modified by variations in wave amplitude, and FM, which is frequency modulation, a radio carrier signal modified by variations in wavelength frequency. And you can see from the pictures that the first is one of the first radios that were oftentimes used in the earlier centuries, and then this is, a picture of Radio Rahim from Do the Right Thing, carrying his boombox, which, now we don't have them that are that big, and they usually require batteries, and so now a lot of your radios will be featured in your car, or you will have your digital radios that you can just carry with you on your smartphones or tablets or other electronic devices. Around the world, radio is a medium of news and entertainment. The low cost of both radio receivers and broadcasting has made it particularly important and ubiquitous medium of mass communication in the developing world. Radio is used globally for disseminating a myriad of messages. In considering the history of radio, we want to highlight a few people who did some pretty important things. Many inventors and scientists around the world were experimenting with radio technology around the same time. So in 1884, German Heinrich Hertz began working with electromagnetic waves, and in 1885 he demonstrated the existence of radio waves. The measurement unit of electromagnetic frequencies was named for Hertz, whose work set the stage for the development of modern wireless communications, both fixed and mobile, a portion of what Americans have come to know as radio. In 1887, African-American scientist Granville T. Woods invented railway telegraphy, that allowed messages to be sent between moving trains and a railroad station. This invention decreased railway collisions and alerted engineers to obstruction ahead on tracks, which is vital. Super, super important. In 1899, Italian inventor Giulio Marconi invented radio telegraphy. This is what he dubbed the wireless, as it came to be called in much of the English-speaking world. and it made real-time audio transmission possible. So although transmitted in the form of Morse code, dots and dashes without a wire connection, it might be deemed the first real radio transmission. Continuing, in 1906, Swedish-born inventor Ernst Alexanderson was among the first to build a high-frequency, continuous wave machine capable of broadcasting the human voice and other sound. Following, American Lee DeForest developed a unique voice transmitter that provided reliable for both point-to-point radio communication and broadcasting. And by 1907, DeForest company was supplying the U.S. Navy's Great White Fleet along with arc radio telephones for its pioneering around the world voyages. Additionally, during the 1920s, the first commercial broadcasting networks were formed initially as radio networks, affiliate radio stations in multiple cities, all broadcasting a common core set of programming, and later as national television networks. Prior to the passage of the Radio Act of 1927 and the creation of the Federal Radio Commission, FRC, the predecessor in 1926, this came before the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, which was established in 1934. Broadcasting was lively but haphazard, and because of numerous competing stations on the same nearby frequency, this often caused reception interference. Not to mention that as the FCC continued to develop, they started to create a protocol for things that you could or could not say on air. So when we think about, laws and we think about being ethical, all of those things were brought forth by the FCC, as well as like profane language or having a certain type of courtesy when you describe people. So before then, people were kind of just talking about whatever they wanted to talk about, saying things, talking about people's business, and so the FCC worked to regulate that. And if you know anything about the FCC today, they continue to regulate what is said on air, what is said in broadcast, and what is done throughout communication, especially that which is public. All U.S. stations are assigned call letters designating the station and their geographic location east or west of the Mississippi River. Stations east of the Mississippi have a W as their first call letter, like WKYS, and stations to the west have a K. And although there are some exceptions that exist, this is still pretty current today. So if you ever wonder why, this is why, so that they can organize them. Radio continued to grow in its early years to become a dominant medium of mass comm. Large audiences assembled to listen to individual programs during much of the first half of the 20th century, but the rise of TV in the years following World War II provided serious competition and a new media landscape to which radio, like magazines, adapted to specializing. Specializations then took a myriad of forms, including program formats, like the time of day for certain formats and demographics. So in radio, a day is broken up into different time segments called day part. So the 6 to 10 a.m. day part, for example, is when most people listen to the radios. They get ready for work or school during the commute. And so here you can kind of see a description of what the day part would look like, keeping in mind that, the AM drive, that's the one that you will often hear, celebrities. So I think for more local stations, you have like the Russ Parr morning show. Those are usually typically going to be in your most frequent day parts, as well as others that feature different types of celebrities, because I know people are listening to the radio for current information that they're more than likely listening in as they start their day. As the outlook for the radio industry continues to develop, industry experts remain cautiously optimistic and predict a slight growth in the future thanks to digital revenues. So spaces like Slacker, Pandora, and Spotify, for example, are often tasked with promoting their services as personal radio stations. Users can create and save their own playlists in My Stations or channels, which are named to evoke radio, whether on the desktop, mobile, or wearable device. Others that you may consider are SoundCloud, which is one of my favorites and allows you to not only hear music from artists that you know, but also hear music from unknowns or underground artists. And these are all supposed to still make you feel like you're listening to the radio, but that you have the ability to kind of choose what you want to hear instead of listening to publicly broadcasted radio where you may still be forced to hear commercials or see ads or ad information, but you can definitely choose the type of music that you want to hear and determine that and manage that through an algorithm on each of these sites. As we continue to focus on the outlook for the radio industry, I just want you to pay attention to this graphic, one of many that you can find on the internet. And this kind of just shows how single downloads, album downloads, mobile subscriptions, as well as internet and satellite radio have increased, decreased, or remained stagnant. And of course, this is in 2011. It's now 2016. So obviously, we need an updated version of this. But this kind of just shows you where the trend is and where it was. So, single downloads is clearly the highest, and from 2003 to 2009, the projections for 2011, it seems like, have basically stayed the same. And so single downloads in 2009, it looks like we're at 1.2 billion, and they're forecasting that in 2011 this is the exact same thing. While if you look at subscriptions, they hit a little peak in 2005, and then from 2006 to 2009 it looks like they beveled out a little bit, but it's been basically the same. So all of these things are really important and impactful when we think about the radio industry and how it is impacted by consumers and consumer needs, and how they try to attend to what consumers want while still making their bottom line and making a profit. So in the mid-2008, Sirius completed its acquisition of former competitor XM Satellite Radio and became Sirius XM Radio. In 2009, the company almost filed for bankruptcy, but thankfully DirecTV was able to rescue it at the last minute, and through doing so, they acquired a 40% ownership in the process. So Sirius XM Radio continues its technological innovation, improving receivers and providing mobile phone apps, for example. If you think back to what we just looked at in the previous slide, still with satellite radio and subscriptions, oftentimes you see that it's just kind of flatlined. There hasn't been a great increase in people purchasing subscriptions for services like these, while they may be purchasing subscriptions from services like SoundCloud or Pandora or Spotify that may offer songs that are typically on preview to be heard in full, or no ad options. So this is really important as we continue to look at radio and where it's going. And I think it's also important to note how oftentimes you'll receive a subscription to something like Sirius XM in your car. And part of that is because they want to give you that and hoping that the consumer driving the car will want it and will get adjusted to it within 6 months and want to actually buy the subscription. I don't know how often that happens for people, but when it was initially started, that was the going thing. And certainly now with the new additions that we have, with the ability to have different types of services, have, Wi-Fi and hotspots in your car, that certainly offers Sirius XM and other companies like it with a huge field for competition. So this basically completes chapter 4, part 2. So continue to look at your text, continue to go back through, listen to this, and good luck on your quiz and your assignment.